Hey guys, tonight we step straight into the damp chill of 14th century Europe. The fire's out, your breath fogs in the dark, and somewhere beyond the wooden shutters, a rooster screams like it's auditioning for Judgment Day. You shift under your straw mattress well. It's mostly straw, some bugs, a few mouse droppings, and the occasional surprise of a cold stone under your hip. You've got maybe 2 layers of wool between you and the air that could freeze your eyebrows. You probably won't survive this, at least, not without some good medieval luck. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. Love seeing where in the world you're listening from. Now dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before sunrise because the day doesn't wait for you and you. The rooster's cry is your alarm clock, and there's no snooze button except pretending to be dead. Your cottage smells of smoke and sheep, of last night's stew and damp wool. The walls are wattled and daub branches stuffed with madand. The wind sneaks through every crack like it paid rent. A single wooden beam runs across the ceiling, blackened from years of soot. You roll out of bed and plant your feet on cold earth. There's no floor, just packed dirt sprinkled with straw. You hear your family stirring your wife, if you're lucky enough to have one. The children bundled near the hearth. Maybe an old parent muttering a prayer that the frost doesn't take the turnips. You grab your tunic, rough wool dyed in a color that could optimistically be called brown. Buttons, not yet common. You just lace it up and pray the wind doesn't blow through. Outside, it's still more night than morning. The sky glows faintly gray, and the world feels both silent and alive. Smoke snakes up from a few neighboring cottages, thin trails against the dawn. You stretch, bones popping, and look out over a landscape that hasn't heard of comfort. Fields, mud, a few skeletal trees, and in the distance, the manor your lord's stone house, sitting smug and solid while your roof leaks. You shuffle toward the well with a bucket because nothing says good morning like hauling your own water. The bucket's heavy, your fingers numb, and you can already feel the blisters you'll earn before breakfast. The village dog follows, tail low, eyes hopeful. He's not yours. Exactly, he just sort of belongs to everyone and no one. A 4-legged beggar who knows which door might drop a bone. When you bend to pull the rope, the cold bites through your sleeves. The water sloshes, dark and reflective, and for a brief moment you see your Fiza little gaunt, maybe 30, which is practically middle-aged glory here. Few live past 40 unless they've got land, God's favor, or a good set of teeth. You carry the water back inside, spilling half on your feet, and your wife's already coaxing the fire back to life. Sparks dance, smoke curls, and the smell of burning peat fills the room. The first sound of the day that feels like comfort. She gives you a tired glance that says another day and hands you a heel of bread, hard enough to qualify as a weapon. Bread, if you can even call it that, is the backbone of your diet. The grain depends on the harvest, and if it's been a bad year, you're eating whatever mix of rye, barley, and weeds you can grind. You dunk it into Ailey's ale for breakfast because water's too risky. People didn't know about germs, but they knew ale didn't make them sick. The yeast and low alcohol kept the nastiness out. So, congrats, you're technically day drinking before sunrise, and nobody judges you for it. Your children gnaw their crusts and argue quietly about who gets the last spoonful of leftover pottage. It's yesterday's stew, thinned again with water, flavored with onions and imagination. Meat, rare. Maybe a bone boiled 3 times for the illusion of taste. Still, the smell makes your stomach growl like a defensive animal. As you chew, your mind drifts to the coming workday. Maybe you're a tenant farmer, working strips of your lord's land under the manorial system. Maybe you're a tradesman, a blacksmith, a weaver, or a tanner with hands that always smell faintly of regret. The Lord owns the land. You rent your survival from him. In return, you owe labor, taxes, and loyalty. And maybe a chicken or two at Easter. The fire crackles. Your youngest sneezes 3 times, sharply. Everyone freezes. A sneeze isn't just a sneeze here. It's an omen, a small spiritual tremor. God bless you isn't politeness, it's armor. Someone murmurs it, half prayer, half superstition. Historians still argue whether that habit started in response to the Black Death or earlier fears of demons entering through the breath. Either way, it sticks. You nod solemnly because better safe than sorry when invisible forces run the world. Your wife wraps a scarf around her head and steps outside to feed the chickens. You follow her, mostly because the air inside is already smoky. The sky's lighter now, painted with streaks of rose and ash. The church bell tolls once in the distance, a low iron voice that announces the start of another working day. The sound rolls over the fields like fog. You pause, listening. That bell measures life itself. It tells you when to wake, when to work, when to pray, and when to sleep. It's not just a sound, it's the rhythm of the universe. Somewhere in the manor, the steward's already checking lists, making sure every villager shows up for their corvée, the labor owed to the Lord. And if you're late, they'll pay with extra work or fewer rights to graze your animals. The chickens scatter at your feet. A pig grunts near the fence, rooting in mud. Life feels repetitive, but not meaningless. Each motion, the fetching of water, the feeding of animals, the tightening of your worn leather belt is survival disguised as routine. And survival is the closest thing to success most people will ever taste. A neighbor waves as he trudges by, shoulders bent, shovel over one arm. His tunic's patched in 5 places, and he's whistling a tune that's been old for 100 years. You trade a greeting, nothing poetic. Just God keep you or fair morning. The language shifts depending on where you live: French, Middle English, or some thick dialect of German, but the intent is always the same. May the day not kill you. By now, the smoke from every chimney makes a gray haze over the village. The sound of animals, voices, and distant hammering builds a kind of medieval symphony, chaotic, earthy, alive. The air smells of hay and manure, of bread baking somewhere richer than your own house. As you prepare to head to the fields, you pass a neighbor's cottage where a small wooden charm dangles above the door, a carved cross, tied with thread. It's meant to ward off evil spirits or fairies who might curdle milk. You half smile, because even if you don't fully believe, it doesn't hurt to have the extra help. Historians still argue whether these folk charms were tolerated by the church or quietly condemned. But the truth is, everyone hedged their bets. You prayed to God, but you also nailed iron above your door. A breeze pushes across the thatched roofs, rustling the frostbitten straw. In that moment, you catch the faint scent of smoke from the manor's chimney. Their fire never goes out. For them, warmth isn't a privilege, it's a given. You try not to think about it, but envy is a stubborn weed. You hoist your tools, a wooden rake, a dull blade, maybe a plowshare if you're lucky, and head toward the fields. The path is muddy, lined with frozen puddles that reflect the pale morning light. You pass the village cross, where someone left a bundle of herbs, probably as an offering for safe childbirth or good harvest. The smell of rosemary and sage hangs faintly in the cold air. A small group gathers near the well, gossiping. Someone whispers about the Lord's new tax. Another mutters that the miller's been skimming flour again. The miller, always the suspect. He's the medieval equivalent of a shady accountant. You grin, shake your head, and keep walking. The social network of your world isn't written, it's spoken, murmured, and occasionally shouted across a muddy road. Reaching the edge of the fields, you stop to take in the view. Rows of stubble, the faint smell of damp earth, the caw of distant crows. This is your world, brutal, simple, and strangely peaceful. Every sunrise feels borrowed, every harvest uncertain. Yet you keep moving, because stopping means starving. You dig your hands into the soil, cold and grainy, and start the first task of the day. The sun finally lifts, weak and golden. It doesn't warm much, but it makes everything glow: your breath, the frost, even the mud. The rhythm of work begins, steady and endless. Somewhere behind you, a child laughs. Somewhere else, a bell rings for morning prayer. Life continues, and so do you. You glance back toward the village one last time before the day fully claims you. Smoke still rises from the cottages, and the rooster, proud fool, crows again late this time, but still certain of his importance. You smile faintly. The world is hard. Yes, but in this fragile, smoky dawn, it also feels alive. The morning settles in with a slow ache in your shoulders and a rumbling stomach. The cold air bites a little less now that the sun is out, and your fingers finally remember what warmth feels like. By the time you drag yourself back toward the cottage, the faint smell of bread, wood smoke, and something charred greets you. Breakfast, or what passes for 'tis waiting. You duck through the low doorframe, careful not to bump your head on the beam that has been lowering a little every year. The fire has fought its way back from embers to a decent glow, crackling with the satisfaction of survival. Your wife's stirring a pot suspended over the hearth, her hand moving in tired circles with a wooden spoon that's been worn down like a relic. The smell isn't bad, honestly. It's earthy, oniony, with a hint of barley. It's pottage again, yesterday's meal stretched, thickened, thinned, then rethickened. Think of it as the medieval version of leftovers forever. You take a wooden bowl, scrape your portion, and sit cross-legged near the fire, the only warm place in the room. The bread lies on the table, a round, dense loaf of maslin, half rye, half wheat, all jaw workout. It's been baked in the communal oven, the one everyone in the village shares, because owning an oven yourself would be like owning a golden goose. You break a piece, dip it into the steaming pottage, and pretend the flavor changes every day. Your eldest child comes in, cheeks red from the cold, clutching a small basket of eggs from the hens. One cracked, two good. A decent haul. The little one tries to snatch an egg, and you snap, "Not now," more sharply than you mean to. The child pouts, but sits. Hunger makes tempers short. You soften your tone, hand over your crust of bread, and watch the pout fade into a sleepy grin. Outside, you hear the distant murmur of neighbors. The village never really stops talking. Gossip here is the closest thing to entertainment. The baker's daughter is apparently betrothed to the Reeves' cousin. Someone's goat got loose again and ruined half a cabbage patch. And rumor has it the priest is secretly brewing ale in the vestry. Everyone pretends to be shocked, but no one would refuse a mug if offered. You lean closer to the fire, savoring the heat on your palms. The room flickers in orange light, shadows dancing along the soot-blackened walls. The air hums with quiet domestic life, the scrape of spoons, a baby's sigh, the creak of a stool. It's rough, yes, but also familiar. The hearth isn't just your kitchen, it's your everything. It's where meals are made, clothes are dried, babies are born, and arguments are resolved. Without the fire, life stops. The whole rhythm of survival circles that glowing heart of flame. Your wife tears a piece of bread, her hands cracked from washing and winter. "The miller took extra grain again," she mutters. "Said it was the toll." You sigh. The miller always takes a bit more flour than he's owed. It's his quiet tax, and there's nothing you can do about it except complain in a voice loud enough to be heard and soft enough not to get you fined. You remember once, a few winters back, the villagers cornered him near the well, accusing him of theft. He swore on the saints that his scales were true. Later that night, someone smeared his door with ash and nailed a fish head above it, a silent curse. The next day, he slipped on the ice and broke his ankle. Coincidence? Maybe. Historians still argue whether medieval people believed more in justice or in cosmic payback. But you've seen enough accidents to know which side they leaned toward. You finish your pottage, set the bowl aside, and stretch. The smoke from the fire curls upward through the small hole in the roof, a chimney, in the loosest possible sense. It doesn't quite work, but you've all learned to live with watery eyes. It's time to head out again, but before you go, you glance toward the small shelf that holds your family's precious few possessions. A wooden cup, a rosary, a tiny iron cross, slightly bent, and a piece of beeswax kindle your treasure for the dark winter nights. Light costs money, and wax is wealth. Every flicker after sunset is borrowed time. You step outside, wiping your mouth on your sleeve. The air smells faintly of yeast and smoke, two scents that define your existence. Somewhere nearby, the village baker's already working. You follow your nose toward him, if only to enjoy the smell of fresh loaves. The bakery's little more than a brick oven with a thatched roof, but it's the beating heart of communal life. The heat rolling from it is intoxicating, especially after the morning chill. You can see him through the doorway, sleeves rolled up, face shining with sweat, arms deep in dough. "Morning," he grunts, nodding toward you. You nod back, then glance at the flatbreads cooling on a wooden plank. He catches you, looking. "No credit today," he says flatly, then adds, "unless you've got eggs." You sigh. You traded the last ones for salt last week. Next time, you tell him, and he shrugs. Business is business, even when it's barter. Bartering is your economy. Coins exist, sure, but they're about as common as miracles. Most people trade goods or labor bread for eggs, cloth for milk, repairs for firewood. It's a web of obligations, not transactions. You give today. You'll get next week or next harvest. Everyone remembers who owes whom. Forget, and you'll be remembered for that instead. "Sorry," he pants, then disappears down the road. You watch him go, thinking of your own childhood when you did the same. The world hasn't changed, only the names do. The baker laughs softly. "That one'll grow up to steal my bread, I swear." You grin. "Or bake it," he chuckles. God willing, the air smells richer, now the sweet, crusty scent of wheat, yeast, and ash. You take one deep breath, close your eyes, and pretend for a moment that you're full. Then a woman calls your name from across the street. It's your neighbor, Agnes, waving a wooden bowl. "You've got some spare ale," she shouts. You nod and walk over. She hands you the bowl. You promise to bring it back filled later. She mentions her husband's been coughing again, the bad kind. You suggest mustard poultice. She says she already tried garlic and goose fat. You both see the universal medieval cure-all checklist exhausted. The conversation drifts, as it always does, toward gossip. Apparently, the Reeves nephew got caught kissing a girl behind the church. "At least it's not another scandal with the priest," you joke. Agnes smirks. "Not yet." You both laugh softly, the kind of laughter that lightens heavy mornings. Nearby, an old man sits on a stool, mending a fishing net even though the river's frozen. "Habit," he mutters when someone asks. "If I stop my hands, I'll stop breathing." That's the medieval motto if there ever was one. The church bell rings again mid-morning. The sound swells over the rooftops, echoing through the frost. For a second, everything pauses. The chatter, the hammering, the bleating goats. Everyone listens, even if they're too busy to pray. Faith isn't a choice here. It's the weather of the soul. You head back toward home with the bowl of ale sloshing in your hands. The foam smells faintly sour, but it's fresh enough. Inside, your wife's sweeping the dirt floor with a bundle of twigs tied with string. The children are chasing each other, laughing, knocking over the stool again. You hand her the ale, and she takes a grateful sip. She sets it down and smiles faintly. "Bread's done," she says. You blink. "You baked today." She nods proudly, revealing a small, lumpy loaf. The crust's uneven, a little blackened on one side, but it's yours. That's something. You tear a small piece, bite it. It's smoky, chewy, a bit gritty from unrefined flour. Still warm bread in your own house. That's victory. You sit together, eating slowly, watching the light through the window shift as clouds move across the sky. The crack in the wall lets in a thin blade of sunlight that cuts through the smoky air. Dust motes drift lazily in it like golden snow. Somewhere outside, a cow lows, and the sound blends with distant laughter. Its strange life here is both so fragile and so steady. You think about all the tiny rituals that keep it going: bread baking, ale brewing, gossip spreading, children growing. Each small act holds the weight of survival. Your youngest comes up, tugging your sleeve. "Are we rich now?" You laugh softly. "Not yet." The child frowns. "When then?" You look at the little loaf, at the fire, at your family crowded together in warmth, and finally say, "Maybe already." You lean back, the warmth from the hearth licking your legs. The room smells of bread and smoke. Your stomach feels almost satisfied, and for one fleeting moment, the world doesn't hurt. You close your eyes, listening to the crackle, the chatter, the sigh of the wind against the walls. Outside, the bell rings for midday. Work will call again soon, but for now, you let yourself breathe. You leave the cottage again with that familiar mix of weariness and purpose. Your body knows the rhythm even before your thoughts catch up. The morning chill's still hanging on, but the light is brighter now, gilding the edges of rooftops and making every puddle flash silver. You step onto the muddy lane that threads between cottages, tools over your shoulder, boots squelching through yesterday's rain. Somewhere behind you, your wife calls after the children to fetch more firewood. And you can already hear them arguing about whose turn it is. The fields stretch out ahead, patches of frost-tipped brown and pale green, crisscrossed with hedges and narrow ditches. You walk with others from the village, each of you silent at first, still half asleep. It's a kind of pilgrimage you make every day, from hearth to labor, from warmth to wind. Someone cracks a joke about the weather, another coughs, and soon there's quiet laughter rippling through the group. You reach your strip of land, narrow and uneven. The soil's damp and heavy underfoot. You drop your tools with a grunt, roll your shoulders, and begin. The wooden plow's blade bites the earth reluctantly. The ox pulls slow, its breath steaming in the cold. The reins chafe your hands, but you don't notice much anymore. You've built up calluses where most people have nerves. The first furrows are the hardest. The ground resists, stubborn from winter's grip. You dig in your heels, push, and the smell of wet soil fills your nose. Sharp mineral, alive. It's the scent of everything your life depends on. Every meal, every rent payment, every scrap of comfort begins right here, in mud that never quite leaves your boots. Nearby, you hear the rhythmic thud of another plow. You glance over and see your neighbor, Thomas, grinning through the effort, still using that dull blade. He shouts. You shout back, still stealing mine. He laughs, loud and coarse, and the sound makes the morning feel less lonely. A blackbird hops along the furrow, hunting worms you've disturbed. It cocks its head at you, unimpressed. "Go on," you mutter. "Earn your keep." The bird chirps back as if mocking your tone. Somewhere in the back of your mind, you remember the priest's warning about talking to animals. It invites spirits, supposedly. But you shrugged. If a spirit's going to listen, maybe it'll take pity. You pause to straighten your back, wiping sweat from your brow. The sun's higher now, weak but steady. Its warmth feels good, though it can't quite reach your fingers. You take a swig from the leather flask at your belt. The ale. Again, it tastes like liquid bread. You sigh. No wonder everyone's slightly tipsy before noon. It's hydration by necessity. As the day unfolds, the fields grow louder, voices calling instructions, the creak of carts, the grunt of animals. The rhythm of work has a kind of music to it. You fall into that beat: lift, pull, turn, breathe. It's almost meditative if you don't think too hard about how your back will feel tomorrow. Then, out of the corner of your eye, you spot the Lord's steward riding along the path. He's perched on a brown horse, cloak clasped with polished brass, eyes sharp as a hawk's. You and the others straighten instinctively, like guilty schoolchildren. He surveys the work with an expression that manages to look both bored and judgmental. Fields look thin, he says flatly, tugging his reins. You nod, so does the soil. He frowns. Mind your tongue, peasant. You bow slightly, though it's more habit than respect. He snorts, turns his horse, and rides off, mud splattering his boots. You mutter something unholy under your breath. Thomas hears and snickers. Careful, he whispers. The saints have ears. Historians still argue whether medieval peasants feared their lords or merely tolerated them. But standing here, with your life tied to someone else's mood, fear feels like the safer option. By midday, the ox is panting and your arms tremble from effort. You drop your tools and sink onto a patch of grass. It's not soft, but it's horizontal, and that's enough. You pull out a bit of bread and cheese wrapped in cloth, the cheese slightly moldy, the bread tough. You bite anyway, chewing slow, letting the salt and sourness wake up your tongue. Thomas sits beside you, swigging from his flask. You hear about the tanner's apprentice? He asks. Ran off last night, gone. You raise an eyebrow. Where to? He shrugs. Town, maybe. Said he'd had enough of stinking hides. You chuckle. He'll trade one stink for another. The towns are growing. Everyone says so, places where opportunity and filth go hand in hand. Merchants, beggars, craftsmen, thieves. A man might vanish there or reinvent himself if fortune's kind. You imagine it briefly. Narrow streets, loud markets, maybe a roof that doesn't leak. Then you glance at your field again and sigh. The earth's heavy, yes, but it's yours or close enough to pretend. A group of women pass by, carrying baskets of wool. Their laughter floats across the field, bright against the dull brown of soil. You watch them for a moment, noting the rhythm of their steps, the way they balance the weight so easily, spinning, weaving, carding. That's their world of labor, as endless as yours, only indoors. One of them, Agnes's neighbor you lent ale to earlier, waves a hand. Don't let the ox rest too long, she calls. It'll grow lazy like its master. You grin and shout back, takes one to know one. She laughs, shaking her head, and keeps walking. A brief exchange, small as a spark, but it brightens the monotony. After eating, you lie back, staring up at the pale sky. A hawk circles above, searching for something smaller than itself. Everything eats something else here. Soil eats seeds, people eat bread, time eats people. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the wind in the hedgerows. You remember last year's harvest when the rains came too early. The grain sprouted in the stack, ruined before it could dry. That winter was thin to many mouths, not enough loaves. You swore then that next year you'd store more barley, trade for salt, plan better. But here you are again, making the same small prayers to weather and chance. When you rise, your back cracks like old wood. You grab the plow handles again, grit your teeth, and push. The ox snorts, and you both move forward into the long afternoon. Sweat slicks your neck despite the cold. Your boots are caked with mud, so thick they feel twice their weight. The steady creak of leather harness and the groan of wood fill the air. By late afternoon, the shadows lengthen. The sun slides toward the hills, staining the sky orange. You finally call it a day. The ox gets a pat on the flank. He's earned it more than you have. You gather your tools, sling them over your shoulder, and start the trudge home. Along the road, you pass the carpenter's workshop. Inside, the rhythmic thunk of hammer-on wood echoes. The air smells of pine and sap. The carpenter himself, sleeves rolled up, looks up as you pass. Need a handle replaced? He asks, nodding at your cracked hoe. You glance at it and shrug. Next week? Maybe. He smiles. That's what you said last week. You grin, then I'm consistent. He laughs, shakes his head, and goes back to work. His tools gleam faintly in the fading light. Planes, chisels, saws each. One precious, worth more than the wood they shape. Skilled hands, steady income. Not much, but steadier than the weather. As you move on, you hear the blacksmith's forge clanging nearby, iron striking iron. Sparks fly out into the twilight. Tiny suns that die before hitting the ground. You pause, watching. There's something mesmerizing about it, the transformation of cold metal into something sharp, useful, alive. The blacksmith nods at you, face glowing red from the fire. You want your sickle sharpened? He asks over the roar. You hand it to him? He inspects it, frowns, and grumbles. You let it dull too long. I let myself dull too long, you joke. He chuckles, sets the blade to the wheel, and sparks bloom like fireflies. The smell of hot metal mingles with the soot, the hiss of water-cooling steel cutting through the evening. Good as new, he says. Handing it back, you slip him 2 eggs and a promise to help fix his fence next week. Payment made. By the time you reach the village, the lights gone gold and blue. Smoke rises from chimneys, and the sound of laughter drifts from somewhere near the tavern. You're tempted to stop, but you know if you sit there with a mug, you'll never get back up again. So you head home, boots heavy, legs stiff. At the door, your wife greets you with a tired smile. She's spinning wool, the wheel humming softly. The children are half asleep by the hearth, cheeks flushed from heat and exhaustion. You set your tools by the wall, sink down beside the fire, and let out a sound halfway between a sigh and a groan. She pours you a bit of warm ale and hands you a small bowl of stew, mostly beans, but there's a scrap of bacon floating in it. Luxury. You eat slowly, savoring every bite. The warmth spreads from your stomach outward, dulling the ache in your limbs. Did the steward come by? She asks. You nod. Said the fields look thin. She smirks. Maybe his eyes are thin. You grin. There's the joke quota met for the evening. As the fire burns lower, you lean back against the wall, listening to the crackle. The smell of smoke and wool fills your nose. Your eyelids droop, the day's fatigue pressing down like a blanket. Outside, the wind hums through the thatch, steady and low. You think of the plow, the ox, the endless soil waiting for you again tomorrow. But for now, the warmth of the hearth, the murmur of your family, and the simple fact of being alive feel like enough. You drift toward sleep with that thought mud still under your nails, but a small, quiet pride in your chest. The bell rings again, echoing across the valley like a living heartbeat. It's the church bell, of course, the one sound no one dares to ignore. You pause whatever you're doing and glance toward the stone steeple that cuts through the morning mist. Its clang marks the hours, the prayers, the very rhythm of life itself. You might not own a clock, but that bell. That's your timekeeper, your conscience, and your eternal alarm. You trudge toward the village church, a squat building of uneven stone, its wooden door heavy with iron hinges. The air inside smells of wax and damp stone. Candles flicker in tiny brass holders, their light trembling against faded frescoes of saints whose eyes seem to follow you kindly. Maybe or maybe not. You bow your head out of habit, not quite out of faith, because in this century, faith is less a choice and more a constant condition of existence. You whisper the morning prayer in Latin you don't understand. Most people don't. The words are a kind of holy murmur, memorized through repetition rather than meaning. Historians still argue whether this ignorance dulled people's spirituality or made it more profound. But as the priest chants, the rhythm takes over half music, half spell-in, you drift into a strange calm. You're not thinking about heaven exactly. You're thinking about survival, about your cow not dying this winter, about the Lord's taxes not rising again. When the service ends, you shuffle out with the others, blinking into the daylight. Outside, an old woman crosses herself 3 times before passing the churchyard, just in case. The cemetery beyond is crowded wooden crosses leaning, earth uneven, bones sometimes surfacing after heavy rain. It's a reminder that the next grave might be yours. But you try not to dwell on that. Death is as ordinary as hunger here, and neither surprises anyone. Back in the square, you see a man hanging a bundle of herbs on his doorpost. Protection against the evil eye, or so they say. The priest calls it superstition. The villagers call it insurance. You quietly do the same at home, tying a sprig of St. John's wort above your bed, because, frankly, holy water doesn't keep the nightmares away. The village is alive with the sounds of faith and fear intermingled. Every cough, every misstep, every strange shadow invites suspicion of sin or sorcery. Someone's goat gave birth to a two-headed kid last week, and half the village whispered about witchcraft before the midwife burned the carcass and said a prayer to St. Bridget. You didn't ask questions. You just crossed yourself and muttered, "Better her than me." Religion here isn't just what happens in the church. It seeps into everything. You plant your seeds according to the feast days, marry when the priest's calendar allows, and fast when he tells you to. Even washing clothes can be sinful if done on the wrong day. There's a rhythm to it all, exhausting but comforting, like the endless swing of a pendulum. At noon, the bell rings again, calling for Angelus. You stop work and bow your head, more out of habit than holiness. You mutter the prayer, then glance toward the sky, where the clouds are gathering into heavy shapes. Rain, probably. Another day of mud and wet clothes. You joke to yourself that even God can't decide whether he loves or punishes you. A passing monk overhears and scolds you gently. The Lord tests the faithful, he says with a smile too serene for someone wearing sandals in November. You nod, feigning remorse, but your mind is already drifting toward lunch. Tests of faith don't fill bellies. Bread does. After the bell's echo fades, you notice the churchyard again. A group of men are digging someone's mother passed last night, taken by the fever that never truly leaves the village. You watch for a moment, the rhythm of shovels biting earth, almost hypnotic. The priest blesses the ground with holy water, the same water he'll use to baptize a newborn tomorrow. Life, death, rinse, repeat. The eternal cycle. Inside the church, the candles burn even during daylight. The priest's assistant, a young boy barely 12, tends them. He's missing 2 fingers in accident with a scythe. They say but he handles the wax delicately, almost reverently. You wonder if he believes more than the rest of you, or if faith is simply what fills the empty spaces in a hard life. As you leave, you spot a carved relic on display, a fragment of bone said to belong to a saint. You can't tell whether it's real or just a piece of cow femur painted gold. The priest swears it works miracles, and sometimes people swear it does. Last spring, a blind man claimed he saw the outline of the Virgin after touching it. Or maybe he just squinted toward the sun too long. Historians still debate whether relics were scams or sincere expressions of belief, but you don't think too hard about it. Thinking too hard can get you burned. Speaking of burning, everyone remembers what happened in the next village over. A woman was accused of consorting with dark forces after she correctly predicted a hailstorm. Maybe she was lucky. Maybe she was observant. Either way, luck and observation aren't safe explanations. She was tied to a post and questioned mercifully, they say, before she confessed. You shiver and promise yourself never to be too clever in public. The sun dips lower, and the air turns heavy. A group of pilgrims passes through, their cloaks stained with mud, carrying badges from Canterbury and Santiago. They walk barefoot, singing tuneless hymns that sound more like groans. You admire them, but not enough to join. Walking hundreds of miles for absolution feels noble until you remember the blisters. Still, there's a strange pull. Every village has its own holy relic, its own miracle spring, its own reason to believe. You wonder if maybe one of them actually works. As dusk falls, you kneel again before the tiny wooden crucifix by your bed. The candlelight makes Christ's face look alive, the shadows deepening his eyes. You murmur a prayer for good harvest, healthy children, and maybe just maybe a little warmth this winter. You feel comforted for a moment, then the wind rattles the shutters, and the candle flickers out. The darkness is absolute, broken only by the faint glow from the hearth. You hear mice scurrying in the straw and think, half asleep, that maybe those little thieves are part of God's creation too. Then again, they eat your grain, so perhaps not. You smile at the thought your quiet rebellion against the sanctity of everything. Outside, the bell tolls one final time, calling the village to rest. You close your eyes, feeling the sound resonate in your bones. Faith has shaped your day, your fears, your very vocabulary. It's not about choice, it's about rhythm, a pulse that keeps time with every heartbeat and hammer blow. You live in a world where divine will and daily chores blur into one unbroken line. Tomorrow, the bell will ring again, and you'll rise to repeat it all. Pray, work, eat, fear, sleep. But tonight, for a fleeting moment, you feel the quiet peace that comes not from understanding, but from surrendering. You don't know whether God listens, but somehow you find comfort in the question itself. And as the night deepens, the last thing you hear before drifting into dreams is the faint echo of the bell still ringing. Somewhere far away, marking another hour in a world that never stops believing, even when it doesn't understand why. The next morning, the air hums with energy that feels different from the quiet rhythm of prayer or the monotony of the fields. Today is market day, and that means a small but glorious chaos is about to unfold. You sling your woven basket over your arm, patched, frayed, but still functional, and head toward the village square. Your steps crunch over frozen mud. Smoke curls from chimneys, the smell of burning peat mixing with the faint sweetness of baking bread. For a moment, you almost feel rich just breathing it in. When you round a bend, the world bursts into color and noise. The square is a jumble of stalls, wooden tables draped with rough linen, barrels, baskets, chickens in cages, pigs squealing underfoot. It's a living organism of barter and gossip. There's no money clinking. Hardly anyone here sees coins in a year. Trade is what fuels the day. You swap a small sack of barley for a strip of salted fish, then trade that fish for beeswax candles because the nights are long and you hate the dark. A woman beside you offers wool dyed in deep red madder root, she explains proudly. It costs 2 hens. You hesitate? 2 hens could mean 2 dozen eggs, but that red would look magnificent on your wife's Sunday shawl. The struggle between practicality and pride is eternal, even in the 14th century. You finally compromise, offering 1 hen and a loaf of rye bread. She narrows her eyes, mutters about greed, then takes it. Success. You wander through the maze of humanity. Someone is playing a fiddle that's only slightly out of tune, the notes weaving between the calls of hawkers. A juggler tosses apples into the air. A child squeals with laughter until one of the apples falls and rolls into the mud. The juggler shrugs and keeps going. Unbothered showmanship first, hygiene later. Near the center, a butcher sharpens his cleaver, the sound scraping like metal thunder. His stall is draped with cuts of pork and mutton, swaying gently in the breeze. You notice flies already gathering despite the cold. Good meat, he calls out, fresh from yesterday. You raise an eyebrow, yesterday being a very generous definition of fresh, but you smile anyway. Humor is the only seasoning available in this economy. A group of monks passes through the market, their sandals caked in mud, their eyes scanning for sinners or bargains, depending on the hour. One stops to lecture a vendor, selling love charms, small pouches of herbs, feathers, and something suspiciously tooth-like. The monk warns her of damnation. She bows politely, waits for him to walk away, then resumes selling twice as fast. You can't help but chuckle. Barter flows as naturally as breathing. You hear snippets of conversation. Someone trading cheese for nails. Someone else swapping goat dung for fertilizer, and one poor soul offering good luck kisses for ale. No one's judging. You live in a world where even a smile can be a form of currency. You pause at a cloth merchant's stall, where bolts of coarse linen flap like sails. The merchant gestures grandly to a strip of imported silk from Venice, he says. Worn by queens. You touch it reverently, feeling its smoothness under your rough fingertips. You could work a whole season and still not afford half a meter. But for a heartbeat, you imagine your child wrapped in something soft and clean, untouched by the grit of the world. Then you shake your head and move on. Near the well, a group of men argue loudly about the price of salt. Salt is worth almost its weight in silver here, and one man swears he's been cheated. They wave their hands, shout about weights and measures, and a small crowd gathers. You join in not to intervene, but because entertainment is rare and free. Finally, the village reeve steps in, holding the communal scales, and reweighs the goods. Turns out, both men were lying. The crowd bursts into laughter, and peace is restored by mutual embarrassment. A little later, the church bell rings, this time, not for prayer, but as a signal that trading hours are ending. But no one listens. Market day follows its own clock. The hum continues, spilling into late afternoon as the sun slides lower, painting the thatched roofs with gold. You notice a troupe of traveling performers unpacking instruments, drums, a lute, a tambourine. Music begins and the energy shifts again. People start dancing, clumsy but joyful, boots thudding against the packed earth. You join in without meaning to, drawn by rhythm and the rare permission to feel alive without guilt. You're laughing before you realize it. For a brief hour, you forget about taxes, hunger, and winter's chill. Then comes the smell of roasting meats splurged on a goose. The scent drifts through the square like a cruel blessing. Your stomach growls, but you're not alone. Around you, dozens of others sniff the air with the same wistful expression. A man selling cups of hot ale shouts, 3 eggs a cup. You consider it, then decide you'd rather have the eggs. Survival, not luxury, that's the rule. A friar climbs onto a barrel and begins preaching. He warns against greed and vanity, waving his hands dramatically. But his eyes keep flicking toward the juggler's coin cup. Donate what you can to the poor, he cries. You smirk. The poor, of course, means him. Someone mutters under their breath, "Saints, save us from hungry monks." You bite your tongue to keep from laughing out loud. A little before sunset, the traders begin packing up. Stalls collapse into carts. Chickens are wrangled, and children chase after dropped apples. You've managed to trade well. Today some onions, a candle, a few scraps of dried meat, and a small piece of fabric your wife will treasure. Not bad. You feel a subtle pride, the kind that keeps people going when everything else feels like mud and frost. As you start heading home, you pass a storyteller lean man with one eye and a grin full of missing teeth. He's surrounded by a circle of children and a few adults who pretend they're not listening. He's spinning a tale about a knight who outsmarted the devil himself by tricking him into a barrel. You pause, half because it's funny, half because you want to believe it. The crowd gasps and laughs at all the right moments. You toss the man a crust of bread as thanks. He nods solemnly, as if it were gold. Historians still argue whether markets like these were truly free, since every stall paid a fee to the local lord or abbey. But you, standing there, don't care about the economics. You just know this place is alive in a way the fields never are. The market is your heartbeat, your theater, your escape from the monotony of toil. It's the only place where peasants, priests, and petty thieves breathe the same smoky air without drawing lines. As you leave the square, the sky deepens to violet. The road home is quieter now, the noise fading behind you like the memory of laughter. The faint jingling of a peddler's cart lingers in the distance. You kick a pebble, watching it skip through puddles. You think about the market, not just the goods, but the brief taste of freedom it offers. Back home, your wife examines your trades with practiced eyes. "You got cheated on the fish," she says, sniffing it suspiciously. You grin, "But I got this cloth." Her expression softens instantly. In a world like this, beauty, even a tiny piece of it, is a luxury worth a dozen mistakes. As night falls, you sit by the hearth, the glow reflecting off your tired hands. The distant echo of laughter from the square drifts through the air, fading into the crackle of the fire. You think about how every market day is a tiny rebellion against the dull predictability of medieval life. Here, at least, for a few hours, people talk, laugh, haggle, and pretend they're not bound by the same old feudal chains. And when you finally stretch out on your straw bed, belly warm from a bit of stew and your mind filled with the day's noise, you can't help but smile. The world outside may be harsh, the future uncertain, but in your memory, the market still dances full of color, chaos, and human heartbeat. Tomorrow, it's back to mud and silence. But tonight, you fall asleep replaying the sound of the crowd. The clatter of trade and the faint echo of a fiddler's tune still stuck somewhere in your head. By dawn, the world has turned quiet again. The square that pulsed with life yesterday now sits empty, save for a few trampled cabbage leaves and the faint smell of spilled ale. You wake in your cottage to the sound of dripping rainwater sneaking through a hole in the thatch. Again. You sigh and reach for the wooden bucket you keep by the bed. It's already half full from the night before. Welcome to Home Maintenance, Medieval Edition. You stretch, bones creaking like old wood, and glance around your one-room world. The hearth, the bed of straw, the table that wobbles if you breathe too hard. A piglet snuffles in the corner near the fire, sharing warmth with the family's only chicken. Privacy. That's a word for lords and clergy. Here, everything meals, sleep, and arguments happens in the same few square meters. The smell of damp smoke clings to everything. You add a few twigs to the fire, coaxing the embers to life. The first spark catches, a little miracle you never take for granted. Fire isn't just comfort, it's survival. Without it, you can't cook, can't dry your clothes, can't live through winter. But it also means risk. Everyone knows someone whose house caught fire because a stray spark leaped into the thatch. So you watch the flames like a hawk, half in awe, half in fear. Your wife stirs the pot from last night's barley stew, now thick as mud, but edible. She scrapes off a bit of mold from the crust of bread and hands it to you. You don't complain. It's food, and it's warm. As you eat, your youngest tugs on your sleeve, holding up a ripped bit of tunic. It tore, they say, small voice hopeful. You sigh again, not at them, but at the endlessness of it all. We'll fix it after chores, you promise. The day ahead looks ordinary, which means it'll be hard. You step outside and squint into the gray morning. Chickens scatter around your feet, offended that you haven't fed them yet. The air smells like wet straw and manure, oddly comforting scent. Proof that the world still turns. You fill a bucket at the well, careful not to slip on the slick mud. Your neighbor is already out, patching his fence. He nods in greeting. Storm's coming, he says. You nod back. He says that every other day, but he's usually right. Inside again, the cottage feels warmer, alive with the soft chaos of morning. You repair tools while your wife kneads dough. The children chase each other, laughing, until one knocks over the water bucket and the laughter turns into shouting. You mutter something unholy under your breath, then grin when your wife shoots you a look. Humor, even mild blasphemy, is the only way to stay sane. You spend the next hour fixing the roof the hole that's been leaking since autumn. You balance on the ladder made of uneven branches, straw and twine in hand. It's slow work, and one misstep could send you tumbling. Your fingers sting from the cold, your back aches. But when you step down and see the patch holding, you feel like a genius. No scholar in Paris could make you prouder. Historians still argue whether medieval homes were cozy or miserable. Truth is, they were both. On one hand, everything's close fire, food, family. On the other, there's never silence, never space to breathe. You love your people fiercely, but sometimes you long for 5 minutes alone with nothing but the sound of rain. Of course, The idea of solitude is a luxury. You're lucky if you can afford to close your eyes without someone needing you. By midday, you start on repairs for the tool's a cracked wooden bucket, a scythe that's gone dull, a hoe missing its handle. You work methodically, whistling a tune from yesterday's market, though you can't quite remember the words. A cat slinks in through the open door, dripping wet, and curls by the hearth. No one claims it, but no one throws it out either. Animals come and go as they please here. Lunch is thin gruel again, flavored with wild herbs your wife gathered last week. You chew slowly, pretending to enjoy it. She knows you're pretending, but she smiles anyway. That's the quiet language of marriage in this age-shared endurance, disguised as small kindnesses. After eating, you turn to the mending. Torn tunics, frayed blankets, worn shoes. You're no tailor, but every peasant learns a few stitches or freezes. Your wife joins in, her fingers moving quickly, rhythmically. She hums a tune as she works. You remember hearing it when you first met her at the harvest feast years ago. It's funny how songs outlast everything: plagues, famines, even memory. Outside, you hear the rhythmic thud of your neighbor splitting wood. The sound is oddly comforting, a reminder that everyone's fighting the same quiet battle against time, weather, and decay. You call out a greeting and he replies, "Save me a drink tonight." You grin. If there's anything to drink. As the afternoon drifts on, you fetch water again. The path to the well is muddy, and you nearly slip twice. The well's stone rim is slick, moss-covered. You lower the bucket, listening to it splash into the cold depths. When you pull it up, the water glimmers faintly in the light. You take a long drink, the chill biting your teeth. It tastes faintly of iron, but it's clean. Mostly, you pass a group of women gossiping by the wella by the villager's daughter who's been spending too much time near the miller's son. The tone is half scandalized, half delighted. You pretend not to listen, but of course you do. Everyone does. In a small village, news travels faster than sound. When you get back, your eldest is tending to the animals. The cow's breath steams in the cold air as it chews methodically. You run a hand along its flank, feeling the warmth beneath the rough hide. That cow is your lifeline. No milk means no butter, and no butter means no trade. You whisper a quick prayer, not out of devotion, but insurance. By evening, the sky is already darkening. You light a tallow candle. It smells sharp and oily. Shadows dance along the walls, flickering like restless spirits. Your wife serves what's left of the stew. The children sit cross-legged, half asleep as they eat. The crackle of the fire is the only sound for a while. You talk quietly about the weather, the roof, the rumor that the Lord plans another levy for bridge repairs. You laugh, not because it's funny, but because you can't do anything else. Taxes are like the rain, inevitable and rarely fair. After supper, you clean the table, sweep the dirt floor with a bundle of twigs, and bank the fire for the night. Outside, the wind howls, rattling the shutters. You wrap yourself in your rough wool blanket and lie back, listening to the storm building beyond the walls. You think about the day, about the roof that no longer leaks, the tools that work again, the patch of cloth your wife mended so neatly. Small victories, but victories all the same. In a world this fragile, survival itself feels like art, before sleep takes you. Your wife murmurs, "We'll need to fetch more firewood tomorrow." You nod without opening your eyes. "And fix the latch," she adds, "and maybe make new soap." You chuckle softly, one miracle at a time. A soft rain begins, tapping against the thatch. You listen, half awake, the rhythm lulling you into that in-between place where thoughts drift. You wonder, briefly, what it would be like to live in a world with silence. Space, maybe a bed big enough to stretch in. Then you smile. For all its hardship, this life is yours, loud, smoky, imperfect, and real. As the fire dies down, you roll closer to its fading warmth. The cat by the hearth stirs, purrs once, then sleeps again. The storm outside softens, and in the last quiet moments before you drift off. You think, not unhappily, that this is what home truly means, not comfort, but belonging. Built piece by fragile piece with your own two hands. The morning breaks softer today, no bell, no shouting, just a faint hum of voices drifting from down the lane. You blink yourself awake, stretch, and realize it's a feast day. No plowing, no tides, no lord demanding your sweat before breakfast. It's one of those rare gifts when the whole village breathes at the same pace for once. The church bell tolls in a slower, almost lazy rhythm, reminding everyone to come and pray before the day turns to festive. You grinna. Most that prayer is mostly the warm-up for celebration. You wash your face with rainwater, throw on your cleanest shirt, which, let's be honest, still smells faintly of sheep, and head toward the heart of the village. The square is already alive, women setting out loaves of bread as big as shields, men rolling barrels of ale that slosh like music. Someone's roasting a pig over an open pit, and the smell is so heavenly that even the dogs sit in reverent silence. Today, you're celebrating the Feast of St. Martin, the end of harvest, the start of winter, and the one time of year when you're allowed to eat, drink, and sing as if the world isn't one long test of endurance. You nod greetings to your neighbors as you pass, everyone dressed in their best, which mostly means not patched this week. The priest stands near the church steps, trying to keep order as he blesses baskets of food and mutters about moderation. You and everyone else nod obediently, all while sneaking glances at the ale barrels waiting for the first tap. Moderation never makes it past noon on feast days. You follow the crowd into the church for the morning mass. The air inside is thick with incense and the faint undertone of yesterday's damp cloaks. The choir, half the villagers, really sings a hymn in Latin, voices rising like smoke toward the rafters. You don't understand a word, but you hum along, letting the sound wash over you. It's peaceful, in that half-superstitious way, where you almost believe heaven might peek down just to listen. When Mass ends, the priest gives his usual warning. Remember, gluttony is a sin. Outside, someone shouts, "So is wasting good ale." And the whole crowd bursts into laughter. Even the priest can't help but smile. Then it begins the feast in full swing. Tables appear as if by magic, planks balanced on barrels, covered with rough cloths. Dishes spread across them stew, bread, cheese, apples, and pies filled with anything that didn't spoil. Music starts up, fiddles and pipes, and the rhythmic clapping of hands. You take a cup of ale, raise it to the sky, and feel the warmth bloom in your chest. For once, the world doesn't feel cruel, it feels alive. Children chase each other with sticks, pretending to be knights. An old woman tells fortunes with bits of wax dropped into cold water. Someone's already trying to start a dance, dragging reluctant partners into the circle. You're pulled in before you can protest, spinning clumsily, laughing until your ribs hurt. The ground is muddy, your shoes are soaked, but who cares? You're dizzy with joy. Later, you settle onto a bench beside the fire pit where a group of villagers pass around roasted chestnuts. The talk turns from harvest yields to ghosts and miracles. Someone claims they saw St. Martin's face in the clouds that morning. Someone else swears their cow stopped limping after they tied a blessed ribbon to its tail. Historians still argue whether these stories were born of faith or boredom, but in this moment, it doesn't matter. You're all suspended between belief and laughter. A bard from the next town begins a story about a knight, a dragon, and a clever farmer who tricks them both. He gestures wildly, exaggerating every motion, and when he reaches the part where the farmer pretends to faint, you're laughing so hard your ale spills. The children hang on every word, wide-eyed, while the adults nudge each other, mouthing the ending before it's told. You've all heard the story 100 times, but somehow it never loses its charm. As the sun climbs higher, the ale flows faster. The dancing grows louder, wilder. Someone breaks out a drum. Someone else grabs a tambourine. Couples spin in circles, and a few brave souls attempt the carol steps the traveling musicians taught them last year. A pig escapes the roasting pit for a glorious minute of freedom before two men chase it down, both slipping spectacularly in the mud. The crowd roars with laughter. At midday, a friendly contest begins archery for the men, spinning races for the women, and a tug-of-war for everyone too full to move otherwise. You join in, gripping the rope with muddy hands, laughing as you fall backward into the muck when your side loses. The children cheer like you've won a war. Then comes the mummers' playa troupe of villagers dressed as saints, devils, and fools, performing a short drama that mixes piety with mischief. The devil is the blacksmith, his face smeared with soot, waving a pitchfork and cackling. The angel is your neighbor's son, wearing wings made of goose feathers that keep falling off. When St. Martin arrives, riding a wooden hobby horse, the crowd claps like royalties just entered. Afterward, you wander toward the edge of the celebration where the quieter folk gather. There's the widow Agnes, stirring a pot of spiced wine. She offers you a cup, and it tastes like warmth and cinnamon and stories. She tells you of her youth, of dances under moonlight and summers that seem to last forever. You listen, smiling softly. The way she speaks makes time feel less like a line and more like a circle. As the sun begins to dip, torches are lit around the square. Shadows dance across the thatched roofs, and the music shifts to a slower rhythm. The ale is nearly gone, the pies reduced to crumbs, but the laughter remains. You feel it in your chest, that rare golden ache that comes from being human in good company. Someone starts singing a simple tune about St. Martin's generosity, how he shared his cloak with a beggar. The song catches, spreading through the crowd until everyone's humming. You join in quietly. Your voice cracks on the high notes, but no one minds. Out here, perfection isn't the point. Togetherness is. The priest, now visibly tipsy, raises a hand. "Remember," he says with mock seriousness, "no sins after sundown." The crowd erupts in applause and irony, and you suspect even heaven might be laughing along tonight. Later, as the fires burn low and the stars emerge, couples steal away to the edge of the woods. The children fall asleep in piles of cloaks, their faces smudged with ash and crumbs. You sit with your wife, sharing the last crust of bread, your fingers brushing in the dark. You whisper a joke about St. Martin being the only saint who'd approve of so much drinking, and she laughs quietly against your shoulder. The embers crackle, the music fades, and the world narrows to the glow of fire and the warmth of being alive. For one day, the weight of work and hunger and fear lifts, replaced by something older than either faith or survival. Joy. You glance around the faces lit by flame, the stars scattered like grain across the black sky. You think, if this isn't holiness, what is? Tomorrow, the bell will ring again, and the fields will call. But tonight, the village dreams as one, held together by laughter, song, and the faint smell of roasted meat still hanging in the air. The morning after the feast feels heavier, slower, the kind of quiet that follows a thunderstorm. You stir beneath your blanket, eyelids sticky from too little sleep and too much ale. Outside, the roosters crow as if nothing happened. As if the world hasn't spent the last 12 hours dancing, shouting, and pretending that winter isn't waiting right outside the door. You rise and stretch, every muscle protesting, your head filled with what could either be regret or just too much roasted pork. The air is sharp, full of frost and silence, and you realize today the world goes back to work. You step outside, and the village looks different now. The bright banners from yesterday hang limp. The table's empty except for a few crusts of bread and a forgotten wooden mug. The children who were running wild last night are now being herded toward chores by mothers with no patience for lingering joy. It's as if someone took a great brush and wiped the color off everything. You start toward the barn, boots crunching through the thin frost. The fields beyond the cottages are brown and bare now, lines of earth scarred by months of plowing. Winter is here, And that means one thing: survival. The harvest was decent this year, thankfully, but you know how quickly supplies vanish. The Lord's tithe, the church's tithe, the grain owed to the miller, all that leaves little for you. You run your fingers along the sacks of barley stored in the corner, feeling their weight, counting without counting. It's never enough. It never is. You grab a handful of dried beans and start sorting through them by the dim light sneaking through the cracks. Rats have gotten to some, the greedy little thieves. You set a few traps near the grain bins and mutter under your breath that even they're hungrier this year. Outside, smoke curls from chimneys, again this time thinner, more disciplined. Women are already spinning flax into thread, the rhythmic wheel filling the morning air. You join the men cutting firewood, your breath forming ghosts in the cold. Each swing of the axe is steady, deliberate, the thud of wood splitting echoing through the valley like a heartbeat. The conversation turns grim quickly, as it always does when the days shorten. Heard there's sickness near the river, someone says. Another shakes his head. Always sickness near the river. Always has been. You keep chopping, but the words sit heavy. Illness in winter is worse than hunger. It sneaks, lingers, and doesn't care how hard you work. After an hour, you pause to catch your breath, rubbing your hands. The calluses have built up over years, but the ache never truly goes away. You look toward the manor house on the hill, the Lord's lands, shining faintly with frost, untouched by poverty. Someone jokes that the Lord's pigs eat better than half the village. You all laugh, but not too loudly. Laughter about the Lord travels faster than gossip. By midday, you head to the well, shoulders sore, to draw water for your wife. The bucket groans as it dips below the surface, breaking the thin layer of ice. You think about how much harder it'll be once winter deepens and the well freezes solid. Then you'll be breaking ice before dawn, hands numb, breath stinging like needles. The sun hangs low already. It barely bothers to climb high these days. You carry the water home and find your wife hunched over a pot, stirring a thin stew of beans and cabbage. The smell is comforting, even if your stomach already knows it won't be enough. She glances up and smiles faintly, brushing hair from her face with a soot-streaked hand. You sit and eat in silence, the fire crackling softly. The stew warms you, spreading heat to your fingers. The moment feels small but good to people sharing warmth against the vast, uncaring cold. Then you hear the bell. Not the church bell, but the smaller one warning. You step outside, joining your neighbors rushing toward the square. A boy, breathless, arrives on horseback, shouting news. Bandits on the road, again. A merchant robbed not a mile away. You trade uneasy glances. Bandits are as common as frost in these parts, desperate men turned wild by hunger or war. The roads belong to no one but those strong enough to take them. Someone mutters that even the Lord's guards won't bother hunting them in winter. Too cold for justice, another says with a bitter chuckle. You think of the travelers who pass through, the pilgrims heading south, their cloaks thin and eyes hollow. Not all bandits start that way, you remind yourself. Hunger changes a man faster than sin ever could. As the day fades, you repair the fence around your small plot, tightening the ropes that keep the animals from wandering. The sheep bleat softly, their breath visible in the cold dusk. You toss them the last of the autumn hay and hope they make it through the season. Inside, as darkness settles, your wife lights a tallow candle, its flame thin, sputtering. You both sit near the fire, patching clothes, the silence broken only by the crackle of burning wood. It's a quiet evening, one that might look peaceful to someone centuries away. But here, it's a battle fought with patience and routine. She talks softly about the old days before you were married, when winters felt longer but somehow kinder. You listen, smiling faintly, though you both know memory lies as sweetly as any minstrel. The wind rises outside, whistling through the cracks in the door. You wrap another blanket around your shoulders, the rough wool scratching your skin. The candle trembles, casting shadows that dance across the walls. For a moment, You almost imagine faces, their flickering spirits of the house, watching quietly. Superstition slips easily into nights like this. People say the dead walk in the cold months, looking for warmth, for prayers, for someone to remember their names. You shiver, half laughing, half listening for footsteps. Historians still argue whether medieval people truly feared ghosts or just found comfort in giving darkness a face. You whisper a small prayer before sleep, one for warmth, one for enough food, and maybe one for a bit more luck next year. Because in truth, survival isn't just about strength. It's about faith in things unseen. The next morning brings work again. You help mend the roof of a neighbor's house, the straw damp and heavy from last night's frost. You trade labor for labor, his roof today, yours tomorrow. That's how villages survive, one hand always reaching for another. At noon, a peddler arrives, trudging through the mud with a cart full of oddities, combs, ribbons, bits of metal, even a few glass beads that shimmer like treasure. The children swarm him instantly. You trade a handful of eggs for a small tin cross, more charm than holy object, but it feels nice to hold something shiny amid all this gray. He tells stories as he sells tales from towns far away, of kings and wars and strange beasts in distant lands. You listen, caught between wonder and skepticism. A sea serpent longer than a ship, sure, but his voice is so full of conviction that for a moment you almost believe. After he leaves, the day slips back into quiet. You tend to the animals, stack firewood, and help your wife spread grain on the floor to dry by the fire. The rhythm of life returns, slow and methodical. You find peace in it, strange as it sounds. There's comfort in the repetition, in knowing exactly what needs to be done. That night, the sky clears. You step outside and look up. The stars are so sharp they almost hurt to see. Somewhere far away, scholars are trying to chart them, believing the heavens hold divine messages. But to you, they're just company cold lights keeping watch as you breathe clouds into the night. You think of yesterday's feast, of laughter and warmth, and how it already feels like a dream. Maybe that's how people survive this century, by stringing small moments of joy between long stretches of endurance. Like beads on a thread, fragile but beautiful. You head back inside, curl beside the fire, and let the world fade into soft crackles and steady breathing. Winter has only begun, but you'll face it one sunrise at a time. Dawn creeps through the cracks in the thatch, thin slivers of light brushing the floor. You rise again, the chills seeping into your bones, and shake off the last tendrils of sleep. The fire is nearly dead, leaving only warm ashes that crackle softly under the first stirrings of the household. The cat curls tighter by the hearth, undisturbed by the world, a perfect little furball of indifference. You envy it slightly. Outside, the village is already moving. Chickens cluck impatiently. A cart creaks along the muddy lane, and the faint hum of labor echoes from distant fields. You pull on your boots, feeling the wet frost give way to the mud beneath. Another day of work begins, and you remind yourself it's not just survival leads, keeping life from unraveling. Your first task is the mill. The grindstone waits like a patient beast, the wheel creaking under the pressure of grain. You load sacks of barley, the coarse grains sliding through your fingers, slipping as easily as time. The miller grumbles about taxes as always, but the work is steady. It's repetition, but there's a certain satisfaction in seeing the sacks empty and the flour pile high. A small victory against hunger and winter alike. Historians still argue whether mills were more instruments of sustenance or control, but you simply call it necessary. On the way back, you pass the blacksmith's forge. Sparks leap like tiny stars from the glowing metal, and the rhythmic hammering is almost hypnotic. The blacksmith nods, calling out that he's sharpening scythes today. You think of the fields waiting, of frostbitten hands, and nod in silent agreement. Tools are survival. Without them, all your careful planning is meaningless. The air smells faintly of smoke, sweat, and iron. You pause to breathe it in. Life is hard, yes, but it is vivid. Even the mud under your nails, the ache in your back, the chill that bites your cheeks, all of it is proof that you are alive. By mid-morning, you're back at your small plot of land. Winter crops are sparse, but precious. Cabbage, leeks, and onions survive where carrots and turnips have already surrendered to frost. You inspect each row, tugging at leaves that cling stubbornly to the ground. Survival isn't glamorous, it's about attention, patience, and stubborn hope. Your neighbor arrives, carrying a bundle of wood, nodding as he passes. He comments on the weather and on the price of grain. Everyone talks about the weather. It dictates life more than the Lord ever could. You nod absently, thinking about how fragile your arrangements are. How one frost, one storm, one band of thieves could undo months of careful work. Around noon, the church bell rings. Not for feast, not for market, just the regular call to prayer. You pause, hands on the hoe, and bow your head. The rhythm is familiar now, almost like breathing. Prayer is not always belief structure, a reminder that life moves in cycles, that each moment belongs to the world and its routines. You whisper the words you learned as a child. Latin that no longer feels strange, and feel the brief calm that comes from repetition. Afterward, you check on the animals. The cow looks healthier than yesterday. The sheep graze cautiously, and the pigs root at the mud, undeterred by frost. You pat the cow's flank and mutter a small thanks. In a world governed by uncertainty, even minor stability feels miraculous. By mid-afternoon, the wind rises and clouds roll over the hills. The threat of snow is real now, a certainty rather than a forecast. You gather the remaining firewood, stacking it as carefully as if each log were a promise of warmth. Your hands sting, but you work steadily, aware that tomorrow you'll repeat the process. Repetition is your shield against chaos. The children wander nearby, playing with sticks and stones, their laughter fragile against the approaching cold. You smile at them, a quiet amusement that survives even in hardship. You remind yourself that joy is not the absence of struggle, it's the ability to notice small pleasures despite it. As dusk approaches, you carry water from the well, the path slick with mud. The sky is painted in muted oranges and purples, the clouds heavy with promise of snow. You glance at the neighboring cottages, smoke curling from chimneys, and feel the silent bond of shared endurance. Everyone is fighting the same battle, each in their own small way. Back home, your wife has prepared a modest meal. The stew is thin but nourishing. You eat slowly, savoring each mouthful, the warmth spreading through your chest. Conversation is sparse, words are for necessity, not entertainment. The fire crackles, the children nap nearby, and you feel a quiet gratitude for these small comforts. After the meal, you tend to repairs. A broken bucket handle, a fraying rope, a small leak in the roof. Each fix is a small investment in survival, and you take pride in your competence. In the absence of wealth, skill is currency, and each successful repair is a small triumph. Night falls, the cold sharp against your skin. You bank the fire, add what little wood remains, and settle onto your straw bed. The wind rattles the shutters, whispering through the gaps in the thatch. You close your eyes and listen. Every creak, every gust, every distant howl reminds you that you are part of something larger, fragile, and beautiful. Sleep comes slowly, the mind wandering through the day's work. The people, the chores, the fleeting moments of laughter and pride. You think of the markets, the feasts, the quiet moments by the fire. You think of survival itself, how delicate it is, how tenacious you must be, and how even in hardship, life persists. Outside, the village sleeps, bundled against the cold, readying itself for another day of labor, another day of careful negotiation with the world. You drift into dreams with the rhythm of the hearth in your ears, the memory of laughter from last week's feast lingering softly, a faint pulse of warmth in the dark. Historians still argue whether life was harder or just different. Whether peasants like you truly suffered more than wealthier folk, or if endurance shapes perspective more than comfort. You don't know, and you don't need to. You know your world, the smells, the sounds, the textures of survival. That is enough. Dawn creeps in with a pale light that hardly promises warmth. You rise, the straw bed stiff beneath you, your fingers numb from the lingering cold. The fire from the night before is nothing but embers, gray and cold. You nudge them with a stick, coaxing a faint spark back into life. This is your morning ritual, an intimate negotiation with survival itself. Outside, the village stretches and yawns. Smoke curls from chimneys. The air smells of frost and wet earth. The chickens cluck impatiently, and a pig squeals somewhere in the distance. You step into the cold, boots sinking slightly in mud that will freeze by nightfall. The wind bites, and you pull your cloak tighter. Today is not a feast day, not a market day. Today is work, plain and simple, the relentless grind of keeping your family fed, warm, and alive. You begin in the barn, stacking hay bales for the winter. The animals eye you, as if to say, "Don't let this go wrong." You pat the cow, the rough hide warm beneath your glove, and mutter, "We'll make it." She blinks slowly, unconcerned with human worries. Livestock are like living calendars, marking the rhythm of your existence more reliably than any church bell. By mid-morning, you're repairing a fence, replacing broken posts with roughly hewn logs. The ground is frozen unevenly, a treacherous mixture of mud and frost. One slip could mean a broken leg or worse. You work deliberately, measuring and sawing, aware of how fragile your little patch of security really is. A neighbor stops by, nods, and offers advice about lashing techniques. You nod in return, grateful for the shared wisdom. In this world, knowledge is survival, and no one survives alone. Around noon, the children wander nearby, curious and restless. You call them over to help small tasks, like sweeping mud from the doorway or carrying twigs for the fire. They complain, of course, but obey. Work is a lesson and a necessity, taught from the earliest age. You glance at your eldest hands already rough from chores and feel a pang of pride. They are learning what it means to endure, to adapt, to make a life from what little the world offers. Your wife calls from the cottage, the scent of thin stew reaching you. You pause, taking a deep breath of smoke, earth, and warmth. The simple smell is enough to remind you why you keep going: the quiet love, the shared struggle, the comfort of routine. You wipe your hands on your tunic and head back, savoring the faint taste of steam before it even reaches your lips. At midday, a merchant's cart rattles down the road, a rare sight at this time of year. You exchange a few coins for salt and a small piece of cloth, precious because it is soft, imported, and rare. You run your fingers along it, imagining the warmth it will provide when sewn into your child's tunic. Small luxuries like this are celebrated quietly, privately, tucked into the folds of daily survival. Afterward, you return to the fields, checking the root vegetables for signs of frost damage. The soil is stiff, the leaves brittle, but the harvest holds. Survival depends on these small victories: the unbroken roots, the unbitten seeds, the faint promise of enough to last until spring. You pause, running your fingers over the soil. Every seed planted, every plant harvested, every animal tended is a statement. We endure. As the afternoon stretches on, you mend tools, sharpen scythes, and patch worn boots. Each action is methodical, repetitive, necessary. You pause occasionally, glancing toward the manor house on the hill. The Lord's lands are orderly, gleaming even in winter's light. You glance away quickly. Envy is a luxury you can't afford. Focus is survival. The sky begins to darken early. Shadows stretch long across the muddy lanes, and the wind carries the first hints of snow. You gather the remaining firewood, stacking it carefully, counting pieces as if each one is a small armor against the months ahead. Your hands sting, but you work steadily. Pain is a sign of life, after all, and alive you remain. By evening, the family gathers in the cottage. The fire is banked and glowing, though the room remains cool. You eat together, modest portions, savoring the taste of warmth more than the food itself. Conversation drifts between chores, weather, and whispered stories from neighbors. Humor flickers in small moments, a joke about the mayor's pig, a playful complaint about the wind, but mostly there is silence, comfortable and necessary. After the meal, you tend to small repairs: a broken latch, a torn cloak, a leaky roof. The children watch, learning by example. Skill is survival, and every stitch, every knot, every swing of the hammer counts. You remind yourself that these small actions build life more reliably than wealth ever could. Night falls fully now, blanketing the village in frost and shadow. You step outside briefly, looking up at the sky. The stars are pinpricks of silver against black, indifferent but steady. You imagine distant scholars charting them, searching for meaning while you simply admire them for their constancy. For all the uncertainty below, the stars remain. Back inside, the fire crackles, the family settles around it, and the day's labor fades from memory. You sit back, closing your eyes, feeling the ache in your muscles as a reminder that you are alive, that you have endured another day. You remember moments from the feast, from market day, from the quiet mornings that are both ordinary and extraordinary. Each day blends into the next, a tapestry of labor, laughter, and survival. Historians still argue whether peasants truly had moments of happiness or if endurance disguised itself as contentment. You don't need to know. You have felt it, those brief sparks of joy, laughter, warmth, and love. They are enough. You lie down on the straw bed, the fire reduced to gentle embers. The wind murmurs against the thatch, the cat curls at your feet, the children drift into sleep. You close your eyes, letting the rhythm of hearth and home lull you, letting the quiet settle like snow across the world outside. This is life in 14th century Europe, not heroic, not easy, but alive, real, persistent. A day made of work and worry, laughter and small luxuries, community and solitude. And in the darkness, as your breath slows and the night deepens, you realize that endurance itself is a kind of beauty.